Good morning and welcome back to Raid Made Easy. As always, I am Mad Capper, and this morning we want to explore the building of a team. In the first video, we talked about what you should do at the very beginning of the game. I don't even want to call that early game. I'm going to call that beginning game. And then after you get kind of through those 100 turns, you start employing some of the techniques and uses of building your champion, which we talked about in the second video. And once you get there, you've gone as far as you need in the campaign. You've gotten to the point where you can start farming regularly. You've farmed some of those specialty champions that you can pull from certain areas in the campaign. And now it's time to aim for the dungeon. This could be the potion keeps, it could be the dragon dungeon, it could be anywhere in the game. The game's made up of a team. Now, teams are anywhere from 1 to 6 players, depending on where you are, and how you build that team is heavily dependent on what content you're facing and what the goal is. The first goal as a new player should be to pass the level. Time should not be of the essence. You should be able to give as much time as needed so long as you pass. It is more important to pass the level than it is to pass it quickly. So, how do you build a team? How do you decide what champions? Well, honestly, most of that's going to be dependent on what you actually have in your account. But let's go into a couple different areas where you'll be building teams at this point in your Raid Shadow Legends life to build out a team. Now, I'm going to stay on my main account, so we have a large breadth of champions to choose from. But quite obviously, you're going to be looking at a much smaller subset at the beginning of the game. And building a team, honestly, is just whatever champions you have at many points. So let's take a look at the most obvious place you're building a team, and that's the campaign. The campaign, at this point, you're running through probably with whatever champions you've been given. Hopefully, you're able to use one of those special codes to get a secondary champion to allow you to go through. And you've been leveling up your main and your secondary champion together, and now you're at the point where, what do I do now? Well, you've already built out your main champion. The first thing is, while it may sound obvious to some, is to make sure you have gear on all those champions. Early game, if you have leftover lifesteal gear, that would be good for any of your champions that can deal damage. Every other champion, you should probably be survivable as possible. So if you're trying to push through areas of the game that maybe right now you cannot do with just your starter champion, this is a common area that people get stuck in because they're trying to use their starter and there's a lot of forced champions. So when you're looking at what to put into content, one of the things you should always look for is what are you facing and what sort of champions. Now, it'll always show you the final round, but it won't show you all 3 rounds, so keep that in mind as well. This may have 3. The 2 before it might have a different affinity. Typically, there's an affinity theme through each of the levels. So here, Hallowed Halls is mainly a force affinity, as is Vladimir Strait. Valdemar. I was going to call it Vladimir, but it's Valdemar. Valdemar Strait, you see there's a lot of force affinity. And Felwyn's Gate has a lot of force affinity as well. So these are the ones that people typically get stuck in because most of the time, I mean, your starter is magic affinity, and typically you don't have any spirit affinity or even force affinity nukers this early in the game, though if you're lucky enough, excellent, makes life a lot easier. So you go into Hallowed Halls and you want to try to get through this, and you're looking at what sort of you're facing here. As you can see, I've used Relic Keeper way back in the days at one point. But you're still going to use your starter, because your starter is still going to be your strongest champion at this point. So you're going to not want to mess around. Let's pretend that I used my Rhonda as my starter. So the next thing I know is I'm going to get some weak hits. It's probably going to take a little bit longer to fight this team. So I want to bring in a second champion to help me through, and then a couple food. In this case, you have kind of 2 options. If you were lucky enough to pull a force or spirit affinity damage dealer, then absolutely use a force affinity or a spirit affinity damage dealer, and the 2 of them together, it's going to be pretty simple for you to be able to get through the campaign. If that's not the case, if you're still having problems, the next thing you can do is, well, we farmed it, so why don't we use it? And that is your War Maiden. If you happen to use Deacon as your free champion, Deacon in this point, Spirit Affinity, perfect, understandable champion you could easily use as well. We're going to grab my War Maiden. We're going to pretend I don't have a Deacon. Right. This is probably the most common duo you'll be using because it gives you the opportunity to lay down decreased defense, which will allow your starter to have more luck with those champions. So this is the easiest place to figure out what to put together. If you needed to, you could use a third champion. Here's my starter, for example. And if need to, you can use a fourth champion. Do not be scared to use multiple champions that you've started to level up to be able to get through these key content places in building your team. This is a very simple setup. There's 4 champions. Use all 4 if you must. You want to get to 12-3, and then you want to get to 12-3 solo, meaning only the rest would all just be throwaway champions that you're leveling up for food. But until you get to that point, again, passing is better than not passing. So just keep that in mind. The other type of champion you might want to use in this sort of scenario, if you're having some problems, is a healer. Now, results are limited, although funny enough, both my free-to-play account and my girlfriend's account very early pulled a Runekeeper Dadric. So that's a really simple and easy one. Even at level 40, you just put some gear on that champion that helps them be survivable. So when you're talking about survivable gear, you're talking about a bunch of different sets here. And we'll go through sets at length in a different video. But you're looking at life, you're looking at defense, you're looking at regeneration if you happen to have it, which you probably won't. I think there is a free regen set that you get in the first 30 days. It's only going to be a 4-star, but it'll still be good enough to help get that support, that pseudo support champion that you haven't really built out yet, but you need some kind of survivability just to get through the level. More importantly, you're probably asking, how do I get through the dragon? And that's probably where we should talk about the most champion building. So when you get to the dragon, and you're probably going to be, remember we talked about what stages you want to get to. The first big one is first place to get 5 stars, stage 7. But really, if you can, you want to try to stretch it to at least stage 13. That's the first place that you get 6-star gear. So that's where you're going to start getting gear that may stay on your account till the end. Now, very important, even more important than in the other stages, you really want to take a look at the affinity. So a magic affinity is actually somewhat advantageous for you because at least it's neutral affinity to your starting champion and to Rhonda if Rhonda is the champion you're using. So the other champions you're going to want to bring in, like I said, are complements. So what are the main complements you need in this game? Well, Hell Hades actually has a beautiful website that explains all the buffs, debuffs, auras, and that's where you're going to go and take a look at the champions available for each of those kind of areas in the game. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through some of the core elements you're going to need to building out a team or looking towards building out a team. And some of these may be rares in the early game. You can take rares, you can put some lower end 4-star gear on them and have them do work for you until such a time as that you pull better champions. So your main goal is to just really get through the content. And I didn't mention this in the first 2, but I'll mention this now. The most efficient way to run through your account is to make sure that your first champion is a 6-star champion first. Now, in practice, when you're doing Dragon, if you find that you're very close to succeeding in a level, whatever that level may be, and it's just one of your champions just doesn't quite live long enough, and it's a 3-star War Maiden, bring your War Maiden to 4-star and start leveling her up while you're running through the campaign. And then when you come back to Dragon, she'll be 4-star and she'll be more survivable. I wouldn't suggest taking her to 5-star before getting your main to 6-star, just because of how long and how arduous it is to get all the food on your first champion. Then you can get your champion. You can buy those 800 gems worth for their masteries, and then you can have them ready to go. But at some point, you're going to want to be able to put together a team based on some champions you've pulled over the first couple weeks. And there are a couple different things you want to be mindful of when building out that team. Now, I'm just picking some random champions, and I'll talk about why each subset of those champions, excuse me, is so important to have. Now, here's 5 champions to be a perfectly good, mostly perfectly good dragon team. I just grabbed a couple different attributes that are going to be important to you. First of all, we know you're about your attack champion. That's your champion that's going to do the most damage. You're going to want, if you're able, to have AoE champions, that is champions that deal damage to all enemies at the same time. If that is not possible, other than your starter, which always has AoE, or your Rhonda, if that's what you started with, who has the single AoE, your next best thing is single target damage. So you can easily do either or to be able to get through. Now, you only need 1 damage dealer. If you have good support champions, it may be a longer run, but eventually you're going to want 2 damage dealers when you know you can survive. So what you're going to do is you're going to start with as many support as can help you, but at some point you're going to remove a support and you're going to add another damage dealing champion to help you get through the content. This is going to allow you to kill the waves more quickly, and therefore, if they can't hit you because they're dead, then you will survive. So a team like this, the next thing I want to talk about is, what do you put in first place? Well, the first spot, this spot right here, is what determines the aura that's going to help your entire team. You see here, aura skill increases ally attack in all battles by 30%. This is her aura. Now that's a good aura, but in the early game, that's probably not the aura you're going to want, because you're going to need to be survivable. So in that case, what you actually want is you want to have something with defense or speed or HP to help you survive. Your starter champion has a 10% speed, but chances are you might have pulled one of the other champions that have a different specialty aura that's going to help you out. Also keep in mind, some are all battles, like this one here, which is Deacon. Some are just this is all battles. So actually I picked all battles, didn't I? Of course I did. Randomly decided to pick all battles. So let's remove Deacon, and well, I know this one's Doom Tower, for example. So this one says Allied Defense and Doom Tower, but that's obviously not going to work. You're going to need either an all battles, or you're going to need a dungeons for it to work against the dragon. So just keep that in mind when you're picking. So here, oh look, I have Vrask. He's one of the better healers in the game, and he's got an allied increases allied defense in dungeons by 33%. Very strong aura to help you through the early game. There will be, again, a point where you are doing enough damage to your opponents that you're not really taking on damage, in which case putting the attack will help you get through even quicker. So absolutely take care of that. Once you've determined which of your champions has the best aura that you can go through, keep in mind, Spirit Host is farmable. She's got the 10%. Before I say that, I better double check that it's a 10% null. So we'll go with Spirit Host here. Did I ever make a Spirit Host? Yeah, I did. Is it all battles? Yeah, it's all battles. So that 10% all battles. Conceivably, the 10% speed can be the best in the game. Now, I always recommend, if you aren't able to get 2-to-1 speed, you should probably keep that defense or HP to make you more survivable, tankier. But if you're at that point where you've built out your champions and you're close to 2-to-1 speed, we talked about this briefly, I believe, in the first video, where all your defense, all the enemy champions are going to be their base speed. So we looked at Frostbowman and he was 95 speed. So if you can go 190, you can actually go twice for every 1 turn of them. That means you get double the chances to kill them, which is a good thing. So If you're getting close to that and that 10% speed gets you there, it might be in your best interest to put a speed aura first. But if you're going to take hits, whether you're going 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, if you're going to take on hits, your best bet, especially in the early game, is probably to increase your survivability through defense or HP. Once you determine that, there are a few other abilities or buffs, debuffs that you're going to want to look for. The first one is a decrease defense buff, and that's what we have currently. We're sitting, Tyrell has that. You're going to want an AoE if you have it. Warmane's great, she's farmable. Deacon's the champion you can get free at the beginning. Both of them work perfectly fine, more than perfectly fine. But that decreased defense is going to allow you to do more damage to the opponent. Keep in mind that the opponent may have a champion like Spirit Host, which actually cleanses, so you have to keep those in mind when targeting. A lot of people like doing things on auto, so if that's the case, just make sure you're targeting champions that might ruin your otherwise perfect plan by clearing out all the debuffs on their team, or locking down one of your champions, or just hitting really hard and killing one of your champions in one shot. I can't list all the champions you're going to run into for that, but I will tell you they exist on just about every level, and you're going to find out really quickly when you take a run and a champion locks you out or clears their own debuffs, that sort of thing. So a debuff is the first important thing, and of course decreased defense is, in my opinion, probably the second most important. The fact that it's free is probably the one that all of you should have. The second thing you are going to want is a decreased attack. A decreased attack is almost as critically important, especially on something like the dragon, where the dragon head's going to deal some pretty ridiculous damage. Now I have Tyrell, and Tyrell has a single target decreased attack, which is going to take care of the boss, but not necessarily the waves. If you find that your champions are just getting one shot as soon as the enemy takes a turn, you're probably going to want to look towards a AoE decreased attack champion. If you don't have one, you don't have one. But if you do have one, it's always a grand idea to have a decreased attack champion in your roster, on your team, so that you can survive the hits that are coming in until you're strong enough to clear them in one shot. Skimfos, he has an AoE decreased attack, so that would be a perfectly good champion to bring in. He also brings a little bit of damage with him too, so that would be very helpful to clearing the waves. The next thing you're going to want is some kind of sustainability. Now, the best sustainability is actually a revive, because ultimately, early game, your champions are going to be a little bit squishy. So if you have a revive champion, especially if you have a revive champion that also has a decreased attack or a decreased defense, or something where you can combine the two abilities into one, that's going to be perfect. You can also have revives with heals, although most of the champions that I'm showing you right now are void epic champions. Very, very, very rare in the early game. You can have other champions like this that will cleanse debuffs on you as well as heal every turn. Vrask is a healer every time he takes a hit, though in the early game it's a little bit less than you would like. Thanasil is probably one of the best early game healers. So you can get different opportunities to be survivable through decreased attack on the enemy, as well as healing yourself, and revive is a critical skill in the early game when you're having champions die. It's also one of the hardest to get in the early game, it seems. My free-to-play account still doesn't have a reliable healer. I believe Mrs. Capper got Horafees, so we at least have a reviver on that team for when we need it. Skiramis is a champion we've been playing with a lot on her team. Very strong survivability, and it brings the final kind of category of well, I wouldn't say the final category, but for the early game, the final category. It's the final thing that you really want to consider in the early game if you have it, and that's a form of control. Crowd control is something that's been in MMOs and games like this, turn-based games, all throughout time, and there anything that opposes or imposes a negative reaction on the opponent. So, for example, there's a sleep, which Tyrell actually has a sleep here, or sorry, here. If the enemy has a decreased attack, it'll put a sleep. Now, sleep is the weakest of them because any sort of damage on that champion will wake them up. There's also freeze, stun, and provoke. These are all ways to control what the enemy is doing, and that's going to be very helpful in certain dungeons. It's critical. It's not critical in these early dragons, but it's going to be helpful. If you do have a champion like Skiramis, for example, who does an AoE provoke for 1 turn, that's going to allow him to take the damage. So you build him up with more HP, more defense, and he'll take the damage for that 1 turn while the rest of your team takes the opportunity to kill the opponent. The final thing you're looking at is self buffs. Now, self buffs are probably the hardest in the early game to get, but if you do get a champion that's got some good self buffs, for example, like Ursula, you're going to get things like increased defense, strengthen, increased attack, which is going to help you out through the game. So when you're building a team, you want to make sure that you have a host of these. The most important, again, what's the aura that you're using for your team? Make sure that aura is in your lead spot so that you're getting the best opportunity for survival. Then look for decreased defense, decreased attack. Then look for healing and or revive, as well as, of course, you need damage. Then on top of that, the supplementary or the secondary ones are self buffs like increased defense, strengthen, or control buffs. Control debuffs like taunt, stun, freeze, sleep. With all these together, you should be able to put together a nice team to help you against the dragon. And keep in mind, we talked about this before, you need to have and pay attention to the affinity of the champion you're fighting, or the boss that you're fighting. Affinity is one of the most important. For example, in this particular case, my Vrask is going to be in a little bit of trouble, whereas my Fenisil is going to be probably the safest. The opponents will target weak affinity under most circumstances. We might be able to talk about changes to that in a later video. But for this video, there's going to be certain circumstances. Most of the time, it's going to be your weak affinity. So I know that most of the champions that I'm up against are going to attack Vrask so long as everyone's at full health. Now, Vrask is a pretty tanky character, so that might be what I want. I might want that big tanky character. Whereas I don't want to bring, in this case, a Spirit Affinity champion that has very low HP, very low defense, because it'll kill him right away, and you'll end up losing the run. Putting together a team is how Raid, that is all that Raid is about. From this point forward, all you're doing is putting together teams, improving those teams, and finding higher levels to put these teams together. What you are doing at this point is no different than what I'm doing when I go to hard level 10 and I put together, not that team, when I put together a team in here. Now, this is, I will talk about briefly, but it's not really something you're going to focus on at this point. When you put a team together that you want to use on a level for a long time, say you get to a Dragon 20, and you want to have a team, a set team, put together so you don't have to fool around anymore, you can go into here. Now, what these team setups, these save team setups, allow you to control what each champion does during each wave or each round of the fight. So these are the two waves, the two, we call them trash mobs, or the waves that you get to the boss. The third one is the boss in this particular case. You can name it. So this is my Sand Devil 7 team. I don't know why I needed to name my Sand Devil team, but I did for the early potion ones. But within that, you can actually tell each of your champions what to do and when to do. I'll show you a perfect example of that on, do I do it on Spider? Here's my Dragon Hard team. Prince Kymar has the ability to reset everyone else's abilities and put their cooldowns down to 0 so that they can use all their abilities again. But I don't want him to use that at the beginning because I already have that. I also want him to put poisons up because the more poisons he has, the more poisons Elenarl can explode. That's her ability. So as you can see, I tell certain things to happen each round, right? And then the final round, of course. And just to give people, each of the champions, what to do each round. There are a couple things you can do. You can tell them to choose it as the opener. So in this case, the default for Bad Alcazar would be to use Malice. But if I use the starter flag, it means he'll use Dark Sphere first, and then he'll go into the default. You can also do it, for example, Prince Kymar here, I can tell him to use Seal of Magic first, but then never use it again in round 2. Or I can tell people to use certain abilities in a certain order. In this case, for Theodore, I'm telling him to use ability 2, then ability 3. And then if it's a sustained fight, as soon as it comes off a cooldown, he'll use 1 and 2. If chemistry is important to note, if chemistry is off cooldown and Savant isn't, it will use chemistry. It won't wait for Savant to go, and that's important to note when it has different cooldowns. In this case, they're both 3-turn cooldowns, so it'll always work really well. But say I used Savant Savvy here, and then we killed the round before he got a chance to use chemistry. In round 2, he will use chemistry first, because Savant Savvy will be on cooldown. So that's an important note that you may want to keep in mind when you're putting together these. Now, these can be very complicated, and it's probably something you don't have to worry too much about. The best thing is that you can put your teams in here so that you know which team you're using for Dragon. For example, if you look at here, I've got my Iron Twins team, I've got my Clan Boss team, my main Doom Tower team, my alternate Clan Boss team, because I need a rare champion for some of the advanced quests, and so on and so forth. The final thing I'm going to mention in team building is that nothing to do with team building. I do want to mention that at this point, you're also probably looking at your daily quests as a full completion point. In the very early game, you're probably not going to pay too much attention to this, but once you get to the point where you're building teams for different dungeons, you're going to want to do your daily tasks, because one, that increases your experience so that you can get higher levels, which means you open up more energy, those sort of things. And it's just free resources that you can do. And you should be able to do all of these every day at this point pretty successfully. And that is fight in the Classic Arena 5 times. You don't have to win, but fight 5 times in the Classic Arena. At this point, you should always do your arena tokens. While you want to win, the reality is it doesn't matter. Just use your tokens, get the wins you can, because that's going to be doing your great haul. Using all your tokens, which you get 10, and then it refreshes 1 per hour. So if you're playing the game in the morning and the evening, for example, that's a perfect cadence that'll help you get through. As long as you're using your Classic Arena tokens as much as possible. Summon 3 champions, use mystery shards. If you have 10, you might as well summon 10, because you're going to use it for food through the day. Using 50 energy, I mean, that's self-explanatory. Increasing a champion's level in the tavern 3 times. So take one of your food champions and either put a brew to it or put 1-star common champions into that, so you get those 3 levels. 4 artifact accessory upgrade attempts. Just take a lowest level piece of gear that you actually want to keep and level it to level 4. Purchase an item from the market. It's pretty easy. Win campaign battle 7 times. You also may have a slight variant to this, and it will say kill a boss 7 times in the campaign. So when you do those, you get some extra resources for free, and then it also keeps going with the weekly tick off, which is claim the reward for completing all daily quests 5 times, because when you get all these done and over a week, you get a free ancient shard. For ancient shard, it's a happy meat. So final thing is, as you go, you're going to be going towards this, and for 30, if you do it the daily reward 30 times, plus you are able to do the rest of these, which is 150 Classic Arena. If you do them daily, that's fine. Campaign battles 500 times. If you're in the early game, that is the easiest one to complete. Upgrade a champion to rank 5. That's a little bit tough one, but within 30 days, you should be doing 1 for sure. And 2 artifacts to level 16. As you push forth those, you'll be pushing forth different areas. You'll be creating different teams. I should go into I was going to say that's the final thing, but I should go into the Classic Arena as well. When you're fighting Classic Arena, player power is not everything. Don't be afraid to fight a team. One of the other posts of content, one of the posts from one of the viewers, one of the veterans, gave a really good team that's a free-to-play team mostly, and that is if you got your Deacon. I'll actually go easier here. So you get your starter Rhonda, or you're using your starter champion, whichever you chose to level up first as your first damage dealer. Okay. Then you have your Deacon, because you got your Deacon for free using the code. He's very good in the start because he's got that aura. That speed's going to help you go faster. Not against this team, but in the early game, if you have a Deacon, you're going to be have the potential to be faster than anyone else you're up against. Then you have your Spirit Host, which is a little freebie champion you can pull, or that you can farm in one of the levels. We saw her earlier there. And when you do this, this is when we talk about, now I don't want to talk too much about speed tuning right now, but I do want to mention it. Speed tuning is the ability to control the order in which your team goes, and that's going to be very important. So you're going to want your Deacon to be your fastest champion. Let's bring in, what's his speed? Starting speed 100. So say I have an apothecary that I pulled early, that would be a really nice compliment to this team. Or a second nuker is probably what I would use. Let's go with it. Let's go with my starter. So this is a team that you can put together pretty early. Actually, you know what? Let's even do better. We'll do I even have one built? I think I fed mine. Okay. We're going to play pretend time. I think did I use them all for food? Shoot. Diabolus is a fourth champion that you can actually farm. That is very helpful in this. There we go. So she's got a turn meter manipulation right here. So if you send her to 3 stars, she can actually increase the turn meter. And she's 105 speed. So this is a team, when you speed tune, it's allowing certain things to happen in order. Now, I want my fastest champion to be Diabolus, so that she's increasing your speeds, or your turn meter, and decreasing the enemy's turn meter. Then I want Deacon to go. Deacon has a similar ability. They can go either or, in either order. He does the fill the turn meters and reduces turn meters, and grants an extra turn, where then he can put a decreased defense on the entire enemy team. And then the third champion to go, you'd have Spirit Host, who's going to be able to put that increased attack. So that then finally, your nuking champion, in this case Rhonda, can use her AoE and kill everyone, possibly in one shot. That's speed tuning. That's making sure you're going in a particular order that makes sure that your manipulation of turn meter, debuffs and buffs, control, nuke. And that just helps you get rid of the enemy team in a quicker fashion. So keep that in mind when building it. It's important to everywhere. It's very important in Clan Boss. It's very important in Classic Arena. So you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to the speed tunes. Now, last video, I added a link for Deadwood Jedi in the pinned comment. Deadwood Jedi's website is a beautiful place where you can put together Clan Boss teams. We will talk about Clan Boss in a future video, but just know that if you get to the point where you're probably on Brutal, pushing towards Nightmare, you're going to want to start using that to put together teams that work in perfect synergy to give you either more turns, or to make sure your turns always happen in a certain way, to block the debuffs that the Clan Boss puts on you, those sort of things. We can absolutely talk about that in another video, but for now, I think I've given you enough on building teams to set you forth and set you free on the dragon dungeons of the world. So, thank you for watching the video. I hope this was very helpful, and be kind, be safe, and we'll see you in the next video.